I love the way, and I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him, that Will McGilvery talks about persecution here, and he says it's just different. It might not be physical in the sense of beatings like we have in other countries or what Paul talks about here in the scriptures, but we face a subtlety of our culture wearing us down. We face the subtlety of the cold shoulder and people turning away. We have the subtlety to kind of turn away from God and to start to do what we might consider little sins, like everyone cheats on their taxes, so I'll cheat on my taxes, or everybody's doing this, so I'll do this, or this TV show comes on and, well, it's on TV and I'll just watch it because it's there. We kind of have this slow slide, and what we need to do is to stay faithful to God, to keep him always in the forefront of our minds and to be living our lives for him. And that is how Paul continues on through this passage. So we might not have had the beatings that he'd had, but we do face difficulties. We know what difficulties are like in our life. And he made choices. He says we prove ourselves. We prove ourselves as Christians. We prove ourselves in our love to God by our purity, our understanding, our patience, our kindness, by the Holy Spirit within us, and by our sincere love. We faithfully preach the truth. God's power is working in us. We use the weapons of his righteousness in the right hand for attack and in the left hand for defense. So part of the reason that we choose to live righteously is, yes, to show God our love, yes, to honor him, and that gives us the opportunity to use that sword in our right hand to attack for him, to make sure that we're speaking into the darkness, that we're showing people that this is what God is like. This is what life with God can be like. This is how you can survive. Even in the storms, God will be with you, and that shines as an example. So we have this sword in our right hand for attack to the darkness, but we also have our sword in the left hand, and it becomes a defense, because the attacks will come. Oh, sorry. Microphone there. The attacks will come, and we can become discouraged. Sometimes in the difficult times, we start to think, yeah, God isn't with us. Or we think that other people don't care, or no one understands how difficult this is and the pain that I'm going through. And those attacks come that try to wear us down. And the righteousness of God and the choice that we make to live righteously for him becomes our shield. We can be protected behind that. And that's what Paul is talking about. We have the attack, we have the defense, or the attack here on this side with the sword, and we have the defense on this side. And we can claim that. That's what Paul's talking about. We can claim that. We serve God whether people honor us or despise us, whether they slander us or praise us. We are honest, but they call us impostors. We are ignored, even though we are well known. We live close to death, but we are still alive. When I think of some of those ones there, some of those things that he says, we're honest, but we're called impostors. There was a really difficult time in my life. It was, well, I've had lots of difficult times, and I'm sure so have you. I just get the chance to talk about mine. It was a business situation I was in. I had chose to run my own stable. I was excited about that. That was a dream I was pursuing. But it wasn't working out. I was burning out, not only physically with many physical ailments and seeing the doctor, and it was horrible, also emotionally and spiritually. I know what it's like to be close to God. I know what it's like to be in his word and to hear his voice and to be close to him. But because I was making choices in business that meant that I was working so much that I didn't have time for this precious relationship with God, my life was just dying. That was one of the storms for me, and it was a storm that was both a normal storm that could come, and it was poor choices. So I had to make the choice to leave that, to quit that business, to step back, to change my life so that I could get things back into balance, that burnout would no longer rule my life, but that I could be in balance both spiritually, emotionally, and physically. But making that choice meant that I really upset some people. And it was hard because those were people that I was trying to live very righteously in front of. And their comment to me was, "You are the worst example of a Christian I've ever met." And that was really hard because for me personally, I was trying to make the best choices I could to be a good Christian. Now, that person was not in my church. It was not someone who understood the choices I was making, but it was really hard to realize that I had hurt someone and that this was the example they had. So when I read this, we are honest, but they call us imposters. That can happen sometimes. We're trying to be honest to our faith, but other people can mistake that or misunderstand or consider that we are imposters. We have been beaten, but we have not been killed. Our hearts ache, but we always have joy. And with that one, when I think about the joy that's available, even through the difficulties, one of the special people that comes to mind is my grandmother. Now I know that I've talked to you about my grandmother before. Hopefully I haven't shared all of the stories and I'm not repeating myself. And I think it's really neat because many of you actually remind me of her in her faithfulness, in her joy, in her way of being able to look at life positively. There's one of the members of this church who just, I had the chance to talk to her a week ago, and although she's struggling with health issues that are bringing death, she knows that she's dying, and she's okay with that, and she's really joyful, and she's still living life to the fullest. And she's still going with us down to Toronto and going on outings, and her joy reminded me of my grandmother. Now, my grandmother had some really tough times in life, and I share her stories because some of them might relate to some of you more than even my own stories might relate. The first one that she shared with me was when she was a 4-year-old. She was just a little girl, and her father was dying, and she didn't really understand at that age what it meant for him to die. But she remembers that he took her on a walk out into the woods, and she says, I can still picture the chickens in the dirt, kind of at the edge of the woods, kind of pecking in the dirt and looking for seeds or worms. And she said, he looked down at me with such love, but such pain in his eyes. And I knew that he loved me dearly, but somehow that love was causing him pain. And she said that for her, for the rest of her life, from age 4 on, that was how she pictured God looking at her, with such incredible love, but such pain because the relationship couldn't be all that it could be right now. And that was her picture. So God was with her and sustained her even when she was 4 years old and had that difficulty. Then we get to the romance part of her life. And this goes back a few years when she was encouraging me not to worry if people called me an old maid. It's been a while, so she might be thinking up in heaven that I still am, I'm not sure. But she was encouraging me that romance hadn't yet happened for her, but that people had thought that she was an old maid. But she was waiting for the one man that God would have for her. And her dream was to go to Africa as a missionary. This part I think I've shared with you before. And a missionary came to her church to speak about his mission trip. And he was from Africa, and he was single, and romance blossomed. And so she was really excited. They married, they were planning on going to the mission field, but that didn't work out. She didn't get the opportunity to go to Africa just because of the difficulties, the storms that come in life. Things with the mission board, things with the depression hitting in the early 30s, it just didn't happen. And then this man who she dearly loved, and I never really got to hear much about him because he died, so I never knew my real grandfather, I knew my step-grandfather. And she never talked about him when she was married to her second husband, but when her second husband passed away, then I got to hear these stories about my first grandfather and the way in which she absolutely adored him, and about the pain that was caused in her life by him suffering from pancreatic cancer and dying, leaving her with 5 young children, and how was she going to support these children? That was a pretty big storm. Being a widow with 5 young children, he had been a pastor,